Welcome to Echoes of Ihsan, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the fascinating world of Islamic traditions and teachings. And today, we're going on a journey. We're going through Sunan Ibn Majah, Volume 4.
Ah, that's a good one.
Yeah, in this volume, it's like a window into daily life, the ethics of the early Islamic period, and it's got some insights that are really relevant even today. It's pretty surprising.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, actually. Compiled way back in the 9th century by Imam Ibn Majah. It's, one of the 6 major hadith collections revered by Sunni Muslims. And these hadiths, they're the sayings and practices of Prophet Muhammad. They offer a glimpse, like a peek into how the early Muslim community understood and applied Islamic principles.
Hmm.
And today we're going to uncover insights into all sorts of different aspects of life, from like the practical stuff of hunting to even the nuances of like dress and adornment.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So we're starting off with a section on hunting and animals. And some of these hadiths are a little eyebrow raising. Like, for example, it talks about the rules around dogs specifically. So apparently keeping dogs was generally discouraged. But there are these exemptions, right? Like if you use them for hunting, farming, or if you were herding livestock.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see, I see. So it really highlights like this emphasis on practicality and purpose in early Islamic society, Dogs weren't really seen as companions back then.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, their value was all about their ability to like assist in those essential tasks,
Yeah.
contributing to the community's well-being. So, I mean, it might seem kind of unusual to us now,
Yeah.
especially now that we love having dogs as pets. But back then, it reflects the socioeconomic realities of the time.
Yeah.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It really does. It's really interesting how our perception of animals has evolved over time. I mean, you think about it. Um, okay, here's a hadith that I thought was really curious. It it discusses hunting with something called a mirad. Can you maybe explain what that is?
Yeah, sure. A mirad is a type of arrow, and it has this unique feature. It's got a sharp-edged piece of wood attached to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so this hadith, it talks about, is it permissible to use this method for hunting? Imagine, even back then, they were already having these discussions about, like, the ethics of hunting methods,
Hmm.
and how to minimize the suffering of the animal.
It's pretty remarkable that these concerns were being addressed like centuries ago.
Yeah.
It really reminds us that ethical treatment of animals has been a part of human thought, for a long time.
Right.
So were there any animals that were like totally off limits for hunting or for eating?
Yes, actually, the text specifically says that Muslims are prohibited from eating any predatory animal that has fangs.
Okay.
So that includes animals like wolves and foxes.
Wow.
It's interesting, to see how they establish these dietary guidelines based on like very specific characteristics of animals.
Yeah. Speaking of forbidden foods, there's this really interesting story about the Prophet Muhammad, and it involves this lizard called a mastigur. So apparently someone offered him one, and he reached for it, but then he pulled back his hand when he found out what it was. It's almost like a test or something.
It's a great anecdote. It really shows how important it is to seek knowledge. And especially when it comes to food, you want to avoid any uncertainty, right? So the prophet's actions, they demonstrate caution. When in doubt, it's always better to be safe than sorry. This story is still relevant even today. It reminds us to be mindful about what we're eating. And to, if we're unsure, we should seek out some clear guidance.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, how often do we eat things and we don't even really know, like, what they are or where they come from. Now, on a lighter note, the text also talks about seafood, and it says that all sea animals are good to eat, whether they die naturally in the sea or even if you find them already dead on the shore.
Yeah, and this shows something really unique about Islamic law. It's this concept of the natural purity of water. So the sea, it's inherently pure, right? And all the bounty in it, it's seen as a gift from God. So that means the creatures are inherently permissible to eat.
Okay.
And that's different from, animals on land, where there are specific rules about which ones are halal, permissible, and which are haram or forbidden.
It's really interesting how different environments and contexts shape those guidelines.
Mm.
Now, switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about medicine and wellness.
Okay.
And we come across this hadith praising black seed. It says it's a cure for everything except death. That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is. Black seed, also known as black cumin, it's been valued for its medicinal properties for centuries, not just in the Islamic world, but even beyond that. And while scientists are still, doing research on it, traditionally it's been used for all sorts of ailments,
Yeah.
from problems with digestion to skin conditions. And what's really cool is that this hadith, it's encouraging us. It's saying, hey, explore natural remedies. Think about a more holistic approach to your health and well-being.
Yeah, it's like a bridge between that ancient wisdom and what's trending now in wellness, right?
Right.
Speaking of traditional practices, the next hadith, it talks about cupping, also called hujama, as that therapy with suction cups. But what really stood out to me was there's this specific guidance. It talks about when cupping is recommended and when it's discouraged, and they really emphasize avoiding it on Wednesdays.
Yeah, and this is where cultural beliefs and medical practices they intersect,
Yeah.
While the hadith doesn't exactly tell us why we shouldn't do cupping on Wednesdays, it's probably related to beliefs that were common back then. It's a good reminder for us. It shows us how, medical knowledge and practices they evolve over time. They're influenced by all sorts of things, including cultural beliefs and just the norms of society.
Yeah. It also reminds us to be a little critical, to be discerning, when we're looking at medical information. We need to consider, both that traditional wisdom and what modern science is telling us.
Mm.
Now let's talk about something a little more maybe mystical. Let's talk about the evil eye.
Okay.
So the hadith describes how Prophet Muhammad, he sought protection from the evil eye. And this happened before and after specific verses from the Quran were revealed for protection.
It's really interesting how this belief, it goes beyond cultures and time periods.
Yeah, the evil eye is it's this widespread belief. It's about the power of envy,
Hmm.
and malicious intent and how they can actually cause harm.
And what's really interesting is that the hadith, it recognizes this belief and it gives us guidance on how to protect ourselves. And, mainly it's through spiritual means, like reciting specific verses from the Quran.
Okay.
It shows us how important it is to seek refuge in God from all kinds of harm, both the physical stuff and the spiritual stuff.
It's a reminder that our beliefs, our intentions, they have power, and looking for that spiritual protection, it can give us, comfort and reassurance.
And now we're moving from the outside world to more personal stuff, like what people wear. The text talks about the prophet's own choices when it came to clothing. It says he likes simple clothes, nothing fancy. In fact, there's this story. He once sent back a garment during prayer because it had markings on it and it was distracting him.
Wow. So even little things like that, like the markings on clothes, were important for spiritual practice.
Mhm.
Huh. This focus on simplicity, it says a lot about the importance of humility,
Mm.
and inner focus. Those were really key in the prophet's life.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes us think, why do we choose the clothes we wear? Is it comfort? Is it just practical? Or are we, trying to get attention, trying to show off? This hadith, it's like a call to look inward. It says focus on what's inside, those inner qualities instead of how you look on the outside.
Yeah, that's a powerful message in today's world. Everything's
Sure.
about appearances and having the right stuff.
Mm.
Speaking of material possessions, the text also mentions certain materials that are forbidden, especially for men, like silk and gold.
Right. And those prohibitions, they were a big deal back then. Silk and gold, they were luxury items, symbols of wealth and status. So by saying men shouldn't use them, it helped to make things more equal.
Hmm.
And it discouraged people from being extravagant. It's like saying real wealth isn't about the stuff you have, it's about who you are, what you do, your good deeds.
It's really interesting how these guidelines were meant to like address social problems, make things fairer. But there was an exception to that rule, right? Wasn't there something about silk being okay if it was for medical reasons?
Yeah, you're right. The hadith says you can use silk thread to stitch up wounds. So it shows that Islamic law is flexible, it's practical. Health and well-being, sometimes those have to come first.
So it's about finding a balance between sticking to those principles, but also, dealing with real life situations. Now, the text goes deeper than just the materials. It talks about why we choose certain clothes, and it condemns, dressing out of pride or vanity. I
Yeah.
mean, that's still so relevant today.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by fashion and image.
It's a reminder that's always true. Our clothes, they should reflect humility, sincerity, what's on the inside. This hadith, it's telling us to look at our intentions. Are we dressing to impress people? Or is it about expressing who we really are? It's not about following trends, it's about being genuine.
It's about having a reason, being intentional about what you wear, thinking about how it affects you and the people around you. This whole discussion about dress and adornment, it's been really eye-opening. Makes you think about the deeper meaning behind something we usually take for granted. So let's shift gears a little bit. There's a section that caught my eye. It's about rulings on different creatures and substances. And some of these hadiths were pretty surprising.
Yeah, that's a fascinating part. Gives us a glimpse into what the early Muslim community was concerned about, the questions they had. Like, there are rulings on whether you could eat certain animals. For example, hyenas.
Hyenas. Wow, you don't see that on menus too often these days. I bet those discussions got pretty interesting. So what was the final word on hyenas?
The hadith says that the Prophet, he forbade eating hyenas. They're classified as non-game animals, and this ruling shows how important it was to have clear guidelines about what you could and couldn't eat. They had specific categories to decide which animals were halal.
So it was about specific features or behaviors of the animals that determined those rulings. I remember another story about the Prophet being offered a lizard. It was called a mastigur, right?
Yeah, that anecdote, it's really important. He reached for it, but then he pulled back his hand as soon as he found out what it was. It shows how important it is to have knowledge, to be certain, especially about what you're putting into your body. It's a reminder to be careful, to make informed choices.
It's like, don't just accept things blindly. Be curious. Ask questions. And speaking of being mindful, there's also this hadith that prohibits using wine for medicinal purposes. I mean, that's pretty relevant today with all this interest in traditional remedies and alternative medicine.
Right. This hadith, it emphasizes finding remedies that are lawful, that are wholesome, even if you're using them for medicinal reasons. It shows that in Islam, the priority is on what's pure and beneficial for both your body and your soul. This ties into the whole holistic health approach that's popular now, recognizing that your physical, mental, and spiritual states, they're all connected.
It's a reminder that true healing, it has to include every part of you.
Yeah.
Okay, now this next section, it's always been both interesting and a bit mysterious to me. It's about the evil eye. This belief it's everywhere, has been around forever.
It really has, the evil eye, this idea that someone can look at you with envy or malice and actually harm you. It's an ancient belief, and it's found in so many cultures. And this volume, it addresses it directly. It offers spiritual ways to protect yourself.
So what does it say about protecting yourself from the evil eye?
Well, it describes how the Prophet would seek refuge from it. He would do this before and after specific verses from the Quran were revealed that offer protection. It shows how important it is to seek God's protection from all kinds of harm, the stuff you can see and the stuff you can't. It acknowledges that there are negative forces out there, and it encourages us to be proactive, to protect ourselves spiritually.
It's fascinating how the text combines practical advice with spiritual advice.
Yeah.
It gives us ways to prevent harm and also ways to deal with it if it happens. Speaking of potential harm, let's look at this section on hunting. I mean, this is a topic that still causes a lot of debate today, about the ethics of it all.
Yeah, hunting it's a complex issue. There are lots of different views on it. But this volume gives us some valuable insights into how Islam approaches it. It emphasizes respecting animal life and making sure we're not causing unnecessary harm.
So it's not just like anything goes. There are rules, there are ethical considerations.
Absolutely. Islamic teachings stress the importance of balance and responsibility in how we interact with nature. Hunting is allowed, but only under specific conditions, and there are clear rules to make sure it's done ethically. For example, the hadith says you can't kill dogs except for specific reasons, like if you're using them for hunting, farming, or herding livestock.
So even in a context where hunting is allowed, dogs were recognized as valuable members of society. Mm-hmm. This shows a really nuanced approach to animal welfare. It's not about humans being above all other creatures. It's about recognizing that all living beings are connected and depend on each other.
Exactly. And this idea of interconnectedness, it's emphasized in the guidelines about the actual act of hunting. Yeah. The text makes it clear that you have to use appropriate methods. You can't be cruel. For example, there's this hadith that specifically forbids hunting with a mirad, that arrow we talked about earlier. It's because using it could cause the animal to suffer for a long time.
So even centuries ago, they were thinking about humane treatment of animals, making sure to minimize pain and suffering. It reminds us that we need to be ethical in everything we do, even when it involves taking a life. Approach hunting with respect for the animal, make sure the killing is quick and as painless as possible.
Exactly. It's about acting with compassion and responsibility, knowing that our choices affect other living beings. This awareness goes beyond hunting. It's about how we interact with the whole natural world.
This look into the Islamic perspective on hunting has been really thought-provoking. It makes you think about how we relate to animals and approach these issues with sensitivity and a commitment to doing what's right.
It shows us that these ancient teachings can still guide us on issues we face today. They make us think about our responsibilities as caretakers of the natural world.
Now, let's move on to something that's always fascinated people: dreams. This volume has a whole section on dreams and how they're interpreted in Islam. It gives us a glimpse into how people back then understood and valued these nighttime experiences.
Dreams, they've always had this mystical quality, right? And this section, it highlights how important they are in Islamic tradition. The hadiths emphasize paying attention to our dreams, especially the ones that are vivid, the ones that keep coming back, the ones that make us feel something strong. They suggest that some dreams can be really meaningful. They can give us insights into ourselves or even be messages from something bigger than us.
So they weren't just seen as like random things happening in our brains. They were seen as potential sources of guidance, ways to understand things.
Exactly. The hadiths encourage us to think about our dreams, to look for patterns, symbols that might have a deeper meaning. They even say that if a dream is bothering us or confusing us, we should talk to someone who knows about dream interpretation.
It's like having a window into our subconscious and maybe even a connection to the divine. This way of looking at dreams, it adds a whole new dimension to them. It encourages us to be curious about them, to see them as something sacred.
It reminds us that there are things beyond what we perceive in our waking life. And we can learn a lot from exploring these realms, even if they seem mysterious or hard to grasp.
This perspective encourages us to be more mindful of our dreams, to recognize that they might hold hidden messages and guidance for us. So, speaking of journeys, let's dive into a section that talks about one of the most important journeys in a Muslim's life, the Hajj pilgrimage.
The Hajj, it's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's a profoundly spiritual journey, a journey of transformation. Every Muslim who is physically and financially able is expected to go on this pilgrimage at least once in their lifetime. It's a journey to Mecca, the holiest city in Islam, and it's a physical representation of unity, submission to God. It's the culmination of a Muslim's faith.
I can only imagine how deeply this journey must impact someone's spiritual life. What kind of insights do we get from this volume about the Hajj?
This volume is packed with information about the Hajj. It goes into detail about the rituals and practices involved, and it explains the deeper spiritual meaning behind each one. It's like a combination of a guidebook and a spiritual reflection on this pivotal journey.
So it's not just about going through the motions, it's about understanding the deeper meaning of every step.
Exactly. For example, the text explains the right way to perform the tawaf, which is the circumambulation of the Kaaba. The Kaaba is that cube-shaped structure that's the focal point of the Hajj. The text explains which direction to go in, how many times to circle it, and what prayers to say during the ritual.
It sounds like a very precise and structured ritual.
It is. But the text goes beyond just the mechanics. It emphasizes the spiritual essence of the tawaf. It explains that circling the Kaaba symbolizes our unity and submission to God.
So even the physical movements have a deeper meaning. It's not just about what you do with your body, it's about aligning those actions with your inner intention and spiritual awareness.
Exactly. The text also sheds light on the importance of spending the night in Muzdalifah, which is an open plain between Mina and Arafat. This happens during the Hajj. Sleeping under the open sky without any comforts or distractions symbolizes our vulnerability and dependence on God.
It's like a reminder of our place in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
It strips away the ego and the materialism that often cloud our connection to the divine. It's about returning to a state of simplicity and surrender.
You've put it perfectly, and this emphasis on sincerity, humility, and closeness to God runs through the entire section on the Hajj. It's a reminder that this journey is not just physical, it's a spiritual odyssey. It's a profound transformation of the heart and soul.
It's amazing how this ancient text provides guidance and inspiration for a journey that still resonates with millions of Muslims around the world today. It shows the enduring power of these teachings and their ability to connect us to something much bigger than ourselves.
Now, moving on to acts of devotion, those things that, connect us to something bigger than ourselves, let's look at a topic that might be a bit more complex. It's about the rules surrounding sacrifices and the Islamic perspective on how we relate to animals. especially in the context of, ritual slaughter.
Yeah, this is a subject that definitely requires sensitivity and being open to understanding practices that might be unfamiliar or even a little difficult to grasp from a modern perspective.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to approach this with an open mind. We have to remember that these practices they're deeply rooted in Islamic tradition. They have a symbolic and spiritual meaning that goes way beyond just the physical act itself.
So what are some of the key takeaways from this volume regarding sacrifices and the slaughtering of animals within the Islamic tradition?
The main idea that comes through is this deep respect for animal life and the focus on making sure there's as little suffering as possible. It's not about seeing animals as just, commodities. It's about recognizing that they have value in and of themselves
Hmm.
and that we need to treat
hmm
them with compassion even when it comes to ritual slaughter.
That really resonates with how people are becoming more aware of animal welfare today.
hmm
Are there specific examples in the text that show this compassionate approach?
Absolutely. For instance, it says that the Prophet Muhammad, he used to sacrifice two rams. They were horned, black and white rams. And he would say the name of God, pronounce his greatness before he slaughtered them. This act of acknowledging the divine presence, expressing gratitude before taking a life, it shows how sacred this act is. It shows the reverence with which it should be done.
It's not something casual or indifferent, right? It's a ritual that's full of spiritual meaning and the deep awareness of the interconnectedness of all life.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even when we take a life, we're acknowledging the one who gives life. We're expressing our gratitude for the sustenance we receive. And this reverence, it extends to the actual process of slaughter. There's another hadith that instructs Muslims to sharpen their blades to make sure the animal doesn't suffer unnecessarily. It should be swift and humane.
That aligns with the ethical guidelines we have today for slaughtering animals. It emphasizes minimizing pain and distress. It's a reminder that even in these practices that might seem, kind of shocking from a modern point of view, there's this core principle of compassion and respect for the animal's well-being.
Precisely. And this concern for the animal's welfare, it goes beyond just the slaughtering itself. The text also talks about specific rules regarding which animals are allowed for sacrifice and which are forbidden. For example, it discourages slaughtering an animal that's still giving milk because that would deprive its young of nourishment.
It's taking into account the well-being of the animal's offspring. It shows an understanding of how everything is connected and how what we do affects the whole ecosystem.
You've got it exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Mm.
We can use God's creation for our sustenance, but we have to do it responsibly. We have to treat them with compassion and minimize harm. This careful balance, it comes up again and again throughout the volume. It reminds us that our actions have consequences, and we should try to live in a way that's in harmony with the natural world.
This look into the Islamic perspective on sacrifices and slaughtering animals has been really insightful. It's a reminder that even in traditions that might seem, far removed from how we think today, there are often deeper meanings and ethical considerations that can actually resonate with our modern values.
It shows the lasting wisdom of these teachings and how they can guide us to live more compassionate and mindful lives, even in a world that sometimes feels disconnected from the sacredness of life.
And speaking of living mindfully, let's explore a topic that's really essential for both physical and spiritual well-being. It's personal hygiene. This volume has a whole section on it, highlighting how important it is in Islam.
Cleanliness is considered a cornerstone of the Islamic faith. It's a requirement for prayer and other acts of worship. It's not just about being clean on the outside. It's about purifying both our bodies and our souls, creating a state of harmony both inside and out so that we can connect more deeply with the divine.
So it's more than just, getting rid of dirt. It's about cultivating a sense of purity that extends to our thoughts, our intentions, our actions. It's about aligning our physical selves with our spiritual selves.
That's a beautiful way to put it. This volume gives us detailed instructions on how to perform ablution, the ritual washing before prayer. It's a very specific process, washing certain parts of the body in a particular order. It's a symbolic act of cleansing, preparing ourselves to be in the presence of God.
It's like a mindful ritual, isn't it? It brings our attention to the present moment, to the act of purifying ourselves.
Exactly. It's not just about the physical act of washing. It's about cultivating a state of inner peace and focus as we cleanse ourselves, getting our hearts and minds ready for prayer.
This emphasis on intention and awareness, seems to be a thread that runs through this whole volume. It extends even to things like using the bathroom.
You're right. The text has guidelines on bathroom etiquette. It emphasizes respect and mindfulness even in those private spaces. For example, there are specific recommendations for how you should enter and exit the bathroom, and even what you should and shouldn't say while you're inside.
It's amazing how these guidelines cover even the most private parts of life. It's like it's
Yeah.
bringing a sense of sacredness and purpose to every moment.
It's a reminder that our spiritual practice isn't limited to rituals or specific places. It's woven into everything we do. Even the most ordinary things can become opportunities for mindfulness and connection.
This exploration of personal hygiene has been really eye-opening. It shows how much importance Islam places on cleanliness. It's not just about physical hygiene, it's about this deeper purity inside and out that allows us to approach our spiritual practices with reverence and intention.
And it reminds us that even in today's world where everything's about convenience and getting things done quickly, we can still find inspiration in these ancient teachings. We can bring mindfulness and intention into our everyday lives, turning even the simplest actions into opportunities for spiritual growth and connection.
Well, that brings our deep dive into Sunan Ibn Majah, Volume 4, to a close. And I have to say, it's been a really enriching journey. We've covered so many topics, uncovered insights into how the early Muslim community lived, what they believed, and how they practiced their faith.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you and with our listeners. This volume it's like a treasure chest full of wisdom. It offers guidance on so many things, from the complexities of inheritance laws to finding mindfulness in our everyday lives.
It reminds us that these teachings from long ago are still relevant today. They offer valuable lessons for facing the challenges and making the most of the opportunities in our modern world.
And may this exploration inspire you, our listeners, to keep seeking knowledge, to cultivate virtue, and to live a life full of meaning and purpose. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the vast and rich tapestry of human wisdom.